The mother of machines, that was what I called it, standing before the cohort with a piece of charcoal and a smooth plank of pine serving as my drawing board. I had sketched the outline in broad strokes, the bed, the headstock, the tailstock, the tool rest, and when I stepped back and looked at what I'd drawn, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not hope exactly, more like the recognition of a path. This is the mother of machines, I told them. Build it, and we can build almost anything, even the thing that finally gets us out from under that dying sky. No one looked up at the veil. They had stopped doing that as often, which I took as a sign that they were learning to think about the work instead of the deadline. The veil was still there, pale and thinning at its edges like old paper held to a lamp. But the forge was lit, and the plate was flat, and we had, for the first time since I'd arrived in Iron Ridge, something that deserved to be called a plan. It was Cho Yeong who asked the question I'd been waiting for. She was crouched at the edge of the drawing plank, tracing the sketch with one finger without touching it, reading it the way she read surfaces, by the shape of the air above them. She looked up at me with that particular stillness she had, the one that meant she was about to say something that cut straight to the bone. But if you need a lathe to make a lathe, and there's no lathe, how did anyone ever make the first one? The others went quiet, even Taeho, who had been half listening from the forge mouth with his arms folded, turned to hear the answer. It is the genuine hard problem. I had sat with it in my grandfather's shop as a boy, turning it over the way you turn a stone to find the flat face. Every precision machine in the world traces its lineage back to some first crude thing, and that first crude thing was made by hands, and hands are not precise. The paradox is real. The answer is not a trick. Our first lathe will be wood and string and shame, I said. That's fine. It only has to be good enough to make its replacement. We built it over 3 days under Dokwang's supervision, and I will say this for the one-armed foreman, he understood the assignment before I finished explaining it. He had a way of absorbing a principle and immediately translating it into the specific sequence of tasks required, which is rarer than people think. Most people hear a principle and nod. Dokwang heard a principle and started sorting lumber. The frame was pine, jointed and pegged, with a treadle cut from a single curved bough that Mok Jae had dragged in from the woodpile with the air of someone presenting a gift. The drive cord was twisted hemp, routed over a large wooden pulley at the headstock and back down to the treadle crank. The tool rest was a notched beam, adjustable in height by wedge. The headstock spindle was iron, one of the few iron parts, forged by Taeho to my specification, seated in wooden bearings lined with tallow-soaked leather. It looked, if I am being honest, like something a clever child might build to impress a parent. It looked like it would fall apart if you sneezed near it. Dokwang walked the length of it with his one hand trailing along the bed, checking for twist. He stopped at the tailstock end and looked back along the line of it, one eye closed. Measure it against the rule, Jae. Twice. We do it true even when it's only wood. Mok Jae scrambled for the straight edge, eager in the way that only the very young can sustain, that unguarded enthusiasm that hasn't yet learned to protect itself with irony. He measured. He measured again. He reported the numbers to Dokwang, who listened without expression and then made 2 small adjustments with a mallet and a wedge before nodding once. That was enough. That was the standard. The ways, the flat-bearing surfaces along which the tool rest and tailstock would slide, were the heart of it. A lathe is only as true as its ways, and the ways are only as true as the surface you scrape them against, which brought us, as everything in Iron Ridge eventually did, back to the plate. Everything in the end comes back to that first flat thing. We had scraped the master plate in the 3rd week after my arrival, using the 3-plate method, 3 cast iron blanks scraped against each other in rotation until the errors cancelled out, and what remained was flat to within what our blue and our touch could detect. It had taken longer than I'd wanted, and produced more arguments than I'd expected, and at the end of it we had 3 plates that were as close to true as Iron Ridge could currently achieve. One of them lived on a dedicated bench, wrapped in oiled cloth when not in use, touched only with clean hands. The reference plate, the seed. I brought Cho Yeong to the wooden lathe's bed with a pot of marking glue and a scraper. The plate was never the goal, Young, I said, watching her apply the blue in a thin, even film. It was the seed. Watch what grows out of it. She didn't answer immediately. She pressed the bed surface down onto the blued plate, lifted it, and held it up to the lamp. The blue transferred to the high spots in a pattern I was learning to read, a constellation of contact points that told you, if you knew how to listen, exactly where the surface was lying and where it was hiding. Cho Yeong knew how to listen better than anyone I had met in this world or my own. She set the bed back on the bench and picked up her scraper, a short, stiff blade with a burnished edge, held in both hands with her thumbs riding the flat. She worked in short strokes, each one placed with a deliberateness that looked unhurried but covered ground quickly. After a few passes, she stopped, pressed two fingertips to the surface, and moved them in a slow arc. Hi, here. She moved her hand, and a long low along this edge. Don't chase it, ease into it. A pause. The fingertips settled. There, feel that. That's true. I leaned in and put my own fingers where hers had been. I felt the difference, barely, the way you feel the edge of a shadow, and I understood again why I had started calling her the touch. The instruments we had were adequate. Her hands were better. Someday I would build her instruments that matched what she could feel. That was a project for a later Tuesday. Tae-ho forged the remaining iron parts to my drawings, the spindle, the faceplate, the tool post screw. He worked with the focused silence of a man who has decided to take something seriously, which from Tae-ho was a form of eloquence. When he lifted the spindle from the quench and held it up in the forge light, turning it slowly, I could see him reading it the same way Cho Yeong read a scraped surface, looking for the truth of it. How close on this spindle, Smith? He asked, though the question was directed at me. Closer than you think you can, I said. Then we'll make it closer still on the lathe it's going into. He looked at me for a moment, with an expression that might have been skepticism, or might have been the beginning of understanding, then turned back to the anvil. The spindle, when it was done, was not precise. It was close. It was close enough to seat in the wooden bearings and turn without binding, and that was all we needed from it now. The lathe would do the rest. That was the point of the lathe. The first spin happened on the fourth morning, with everyone present who had any reason to be present, and several who didn't. Do-kwang had said nothing about an audience, but word had traveled through the compound the way it always did, and by the time we had the drive cord tensioned and a piece of iron rod chucked in the headstock, there were more people standing at the workshop door than I had known were in the compound. Mok Jae took the treadle, because he had asked 3 times, and because his legs were young and the treadle was stiff. He pushed down, and the cord pulled, and the spindle turned, and the faceplate turned, and the iron rod turned with it, and I brought the tool rest up and set the cutting edge against the spinning iron, and felt the resistance, and leaned in and pushed through it. A curl of iron came off, thin, irregular, breaking almost immediately into chips rather than a true ribbon, but it came off. The rod was being cut by a machine. The machine was cutting metal round. It's alive? Mok Jae's voice cracked upward into something that was not quite a shout and not quite a laugh. It's making it round by itself. The others were less demonstrative, but no less affected. I could see it in the way they leaned forward, the way Do-kwang's jaw tightened, the way Cho Yeong's hands went still at her sides. Something had changed in the room. Something had been demonstrated that could not be undemonstrated. I kept cutting. The cut was not good. I knew it before I measured it. I could feel the flex in the bed every time the treadle reached the bottom of its stroke. A slight give, a micro-hesitation in the cut, repeated at the frequency of Mok Jae's leg. That flex was printing itself onto the workpiece as a spiral pattern, shallow but visible in the right light. Chatter from the tool rest, run out in the spindle, probably from the leather bearings compressing unevenly under load. All of it fixable, none of it fixed. I took the part off the lathe and held it to the lamp. Seo-rin appeared at my shoulder with her calipers, which she had been carrying since the 3rd episode of this project, with the air of someone who has found their purpose. She measured in silence for a moment, moving the calipers along the length of the part with the methodical patience that I had come to recognize as her particular form of intensity. Then she straightened and read the numbers to the room. Out of round by this much. She held up the caliper so the gap was visible. Tapered here, more material at this end than that one. She set the calipers down. Now we know exactly what the next one must be. That was the right way to look at it. The errors were not a failure, they were a map. Mok Jae, to his credit, waited until Seo-rin had finished before he said what everyone was thinking. Master Han. He looked at the lathe with the expression of a boy trying to be diplomatic about something that was clearly, visibly, undeniably ugly. It's really, really ugly though. The laughter that came out of me surprised me. It had been a while since I had laughed without thinking about it first. It's a grandmother, Jay, I said, the first ugly step towards something beautiful. Everything we ever build will be descended from this wobbling pile of sticks. He considered this with the seriousness that children bring to things that adults have decided are worth considering seriously. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied, and patted the treadle beam with something that looked remarkably like affection. The name stuck. By evening everyone was calling it grandmother. Dogwang used it without irony, which was the highest endorsement available. That night I sat with the part Seo-rin had measured and looked at the numbers she had written in her careful, even hand. Out of round, tapered, chatter marks at a regular interval. Each error was a message from the machine about what the machine lacked. The flex in the bed said, "You need a stiffer bed, iron not wood." The runout said, "You need a better spindle, turn true on a machine that is already true." The chatter said, "You need a tool rest that doesn't move." To fix those problems, I needed a better lathe. To make a better lathe, I needed better parts. To make better parts, I needed grandmother. This was the staircase. This was always the staircase. I thought about Cho Yeong's question from the first morning. How did anyone ever make the first one? And I thought about all the workshops in all the centuries where some craftsman had looked at a crude thing they'd built with their hands and thought, this goes into the next one, which will be better, which will make a better one still. The bootstrap paradox resolves itself not in a single leap, but in a sequence of steps, each one standing on the one before, each one reaching for the one above. You don't solve it, you climb it. The veil was pale at the edges of the sky. The forge had banged to coals. The workshop smelled of iron and pine resin and the particular sharpness of fresh-cut metal, which is a smell I have always found clarifying. This one's wood and wobble, I said to the dark, to no one, to grandmother sitting in the corner with her drive cord slack. The next one it builds will be iron and true. I set Seo-rin's measurements on the bench where I would find them in the morning. We start tomorrow, and we don't stop.